was real? Like, is it historical? Is it something we can actually trust and say it actually happened? We have 4 stories of Jesus riding into Jerusalem on a donkey, or donkeys. 2 are exactly the same. Mark and Luke. They read pretty much word for word for sections. Every once in a while they change a few words, but let me read it for you. Go to the village ahead of you. Just as you entered, you'll find a colt tied there, which no one has ever ridden. Untie it and bring it here. If anyone asks you, why are you doing this? Say, the Lord needs it. Many scholars say Luke copied Mark. And this makes sense, especially when you read that. Mark adds, or should we say Luke, deletes Jesus' promise at the end to send it back here shortly. The donkey, that is. John simplifies the whole thing, loses the whole how they get the donkeys, and just Jesus happens to come across the young donkey, and that's important. We'll get back to that later. Jumps on it and rides it into Jerusalem. But Matthew has a much different route getting there, changing up the whole story, baffling and entertaining scholars and observant readers for generations to come. I'll read it, see if you can catch it. As they approached Jerusalem and came to Bethphage on the Mount of Olives, Jesus sent 2 disciples, saying to them, go to the village ahead of you. At once you will find a donkey tied there with her colt by her. Untie them and bring them to me. If anyone says anything to you, say the Lord needs them. He will send them right away. The disciples went and did as Jesus had instructed them. They brought the donkey and the colt and placed their cloaks on them for Jesus to sit on. Did you catch it? There are a few differences, but one big one. That's right. 2 donkeys. Matthew has them grab the colt's mother. The disciples return to Jesus with not 1, but 2 donkeys for him to ride on. But it only gets weirder from there. From there, the disciples throw their cloaks on both donkeys, the mother donkey and the colt. And Jesus sits on them. Yes, them. At first glance, it seems like Jesus is riding some kind of trick style with them. 2 donkeys at once. Or at least that's what scholars like Bart Ehrman like to make jokes about. It's a funny scene if it was real. Jesus, one leg over the other donkey, the other leg on the other donkey, trying to keep balance as he's jockeying through the crowd. But the real joke is on Matthew, with many scholars saying it's his problem. Because Matthew doesn't understand classic Hebrew literature. Poor Matthew. He reads Zechariah 9:9. Say to the daughter Zion, see, your king has come to you, gentle and riding on a donkey, on a colt, on the foal of a donkey. But he didn't get the classic Hebrew poetry of parallelism, where the poem repeats itself with slight differences. Instead of rhyming, it changes of the words and the lines. In Genesis 49:11, we have Jacob blessing Judah very similarly. He will tether his donkey to a vine, his colt to the choicest branch. Almost the exact same as Zechariah. Donkey, colt, vine, branch, just for good measure. But poor Matthew didn't get this. So he has to reinvent the story to get the second donkey in it. Or that's how the joke goes. But did he? Did Matthew add a donkey to match the prophecy, the official narrative? I would understand if he did. I've been in situations like this before. The police report says you ran the light. But you didn't. Or did you? It all happened so fast. Maybe the official report is the true story. I better stick with it. There is Matthew, sitting, quill in hand, looking over the prophecy. It has 2 donkeys. There must have been 2 donkeys. Otherwise, it doesn't fit. Well, what colt isn't with his mother? I'll just include her. It is clear. Then it may well say it's assuming that poor Matthew wasn't up on his literature style and didn't understand the prophecy. John got it. The same prophecy, but only 1 young donkey. Years ago, I witnessed a motorcycle accident. Some motorcyclist ran into a trailer. Another witness also witnessed it with me. I was only 2 cars behind, 2 cars from my dash was able to see the motorcycle accident. But he ran up and said he was very assertive and very confident that the trailer of the semi went over the motorcyclist's head. Between you and me, when I wrote my police report, I made it very clear that the trailer did not go over the motorcyclist's head. Wonder if Matthew was in the same boat. He clearly remembered what he remembered. He remembered 2 donkeys. Yes, he had Mark's copy there. Yes, he knew it said only 1 donkey. But he knew there was 2 donkeys. A little flustered with the whole dilemma, he writes down, Jesus rode on them. Which was no biggie until some scholar comes along and parses every single word. Matthew kicking himself that he didn't download Grammarly. Another option is that we are getting it wrong. Greek scholar A.T. Robertson suggested it is us who are reading it wrong. There are 2 donkeys, but the them refers to the cloaks, not the donkeys. Jesus rides the colt into Jerusalem, just like all the other gospels says. Just his mother comes along with him. With Jesus sitting on the cloaks they placed on him. That's the colt's mother, not Jesus' mother. She's nowhere in the story. It sounds like a plausible solution, but really, what we have are 3 sources that are clear. 2, if we say it's pretty obvious that Luke was copying Mark, word for word. Occasionally, he changes a few words here and there. You can read it yourself if you want. But somebody was peeking. It probably was Luke. John is drawn from an entirely different memory or source. Interestingly, he includes Zechariah's prophecy where Mark and Luke didn't. Had the church begun to consider this a key part of the story by the time he wrote? Or was the Gospel of Matthew so prevalent at that time and widely read that he didn't want to disagree with Matthew's version? I doubt it. He disagreed with a number of donkeys. John feels otherwise confident enough to write whatever he sees fit. The temple incident at the beginning of the story rather than the last week. Independent to his core, they don't call him Son of Thunder for nothing. But what actually happened? If our stories don't match, how do we piece it together? Or do we even have to? This is the challenge of studying history. If something happens, people's recollections of it is going to be different. How we resolve this determines which one is more plausible, or what is the study of history, which is what Carpenter turned Preacher is all about. Both here and on my blog, links below, where I am trying to understand the life of Jesus better, both from a historical perspective and just as an individual living his life, just like you and I do, as a carpenter, as a real man living his life out. Enough of the info commercial. Colt, young donkey is a common thread in all 4 stories. We have a minimum of 2 witnesses. But Matthew's little confusion twisted makes me believe he was not just copying Mark like Luke did. Matthew remembered this story differently. Or hearing the story from one of the 2 who did. Who untied the other donkey? We can't just simply write off his account. Or just say it's the same, but he's trying to match prophecy. The simplest solution is to take that we have 3 witnesses. Sources giving us great confidence that Jesus rode into Jerusalem on a donkey. Or 2, with our later sources, John, and maybe Matthew. Most people put Matthew a little bit before Luke, but who knows? To fulfill prophecy. I like John's little swipe at the end of it there. At first, his disciples did not understand all this. I'm with them there. I don't understand all this either. But maybe the more important point is what the crowd says responds to the man on the donkey. Matthew again with a different twist. Who is this?